This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Things started promisingly for Alfa Romeo at the start of these new regulations, scoring points in 7 of the opening 9 races. So what happened? Because right now they seem adrift. Only 5 point scoring weekends in the next 16. Caught, if not surpassed by multiple teams, they had a clear advantage over less than a year ago. With Audi lined up to fully take over by 2026, have they backed the wrong horse? And will this team ever be able to meet those expectations? Let's talk about it. So come on, let's wind the clock back 365 days. And rather looking at points, let's look at average finishing position for both drivers. That's more of an accurate reflection of relative performance. Valtteri managed a P6 at the 2022 season opener in Bahrain, a DNF through engine overheating in Saudi, and then a P8 in Australia. The DNF I'm going to class as a P9. Okay, he was comfortably running there before the engine went pop. And again, I'm trying to look at relative pace to the rest of the field. So deal with it. That gives him an average finishing position in the first 3 races of 2022 of P7.7. As for Joe, well, he replicated Yuki Tsunoda's 2023 start to the season almost exactly. He got his P10 at the season opener in Bahrain, followed by 2 P11s in Saudi and Australia. Given it was his rookie season as well, that's pretty impressive, and P10.3 on average. Now again, this time last year, basing off Valtteri's performances, I would say the Alfa Romeo was maybe probably the 6th quickest car. I'd say fractionally slower than the McLaren and Alpine, close, but maybe not quite there, and definitely clear of the Haas, the AlphaTauri, the rest. But now we move to today, 3 weeks into the 2023 season, and it is far less positive, isn't it? A P8 for Valtteri at the season opener was an excellent start. Could they do the same? No. Pace was absolutely nowhere in Saudi Arabia. P18 for Valtteri, and even in the absolute mess that was Australia, Valtteri was one of only 2 drivers to finish the race, technically cross the finish line, and not score points, along with Carlos Sainz. Obviously had his 5-second time penalty. Valtteri has averaged P12.3, which is 2 places lower than Joe was this time last year. And as for Joe, a P16, a P13 and a P9 in Australia gives him an average of 12.7. Almost identical, much lower than this time last year. And again, when you factor in the luck from both drivers, really, the Alfa Romeo pace was nowhere in Australia. The fact that most of the 8 drivers who didn't finish that race were on pace quicker than them 2, their average should be quite a bit lower. Combine the averages for both drivers over both seasons. In 2022, they average out at P9. In 2023, P12.5. A 2.5 place grid drop relative. Canada 22 was the last race where we really saw the Alfa Romeos shine. Both in the points, jobs are good, but then the next race in Silverstone, where obviously Joe had his huge accident, Valtteri also DNF from that race. For the remainder of the season, they'd only go on to score points on 3 additional occasions. Less in the second half of last season than even Williams managed. Not good. And if you look at the last 16 rounds in total, over 22 and 23, again, only 5 point scoring instances for the team. 10 points in 16 rounds. 10 points. They got 51 in the first 9 of 2022. If that's not a fall off, I don't know what is. Now, do they deserve credit for building a car that started 2022 strong? Of course they do. But something changed. Now, did they pursue a development direction that didn't work? Did they bring upgrades that didn't add performance to the car? Perhaps. They seemed in such a strong place. And remember, they were like the only team not complaining about being able to get down to the minimum weight anyway. Perhaps that low weight masked some fundamental issues with the aero. All the other teams could add performance by slimming down the components they already had, whereas Alfa Romeo, the only way they could add performance is by making their aero better. I did put a post out on my YouTube community asking for suggestions, and this seemed to be one of the most common ones, and it definitely checks out. I think there's sound logic behind this. Tell you what, look at that. All that furniture, spinny spin, drag, drop. Beautiful. These are just a few examples of what's possible with today's video sponsor Squarespace and their brand new website building system, Fluid Engine. Just imagine having your very own online home look this sexy, mate. Oh, cocktails, yes please. Completely free to try. It's only when you want to put your finished, glorious website live to the world that you have to pay anything, and when that time inevitably comes around, because you know it will, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to get 10% off of your first website or domain. I mean, when you put this car side by side with the Red Bull, I don't know, it doesn't feel a mile off in terms of concepts. I mean, the way the side pod kind of angles down into the floor feels kind of Red Bull-esque, but then the inlets to the side pod feel much more Ferrari 2022. They've got a very complex air inlet at the top, which, I mean, I don't really know what that's achieving, but it looks cool. It just doesn't appear to have the intricacies in its design that the top cars seem to have. Now, hopefully that will come. But even then, there's another question, and I think a valid one. Do they have the drivers to really optimise and get the most out of this package? I want to talk about both drivers, but more of my focus is definitely going to be on Valtteri Bottas, the driver who is not delivering the standards that I think the team rightfully expect of him. He's been an F1 driver for 10 years, having made his debut for Williams way back in 2013. Over 200 race starts to his name. He's got 10 wins, having spent 5 years at the very front alongside Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. Yet here we are 3 races into 2023 and he's at least being matched, if not marginally outperformed, by his only second year, almost rookie teammate, Zhou Guanyu. A teammate who did not light up the junior formulas like a Charles Leclerc, like a George Russell. Maybe Zhou is a slower burner, but when a driver comes in, like a Charles Leclerc when he came in at Sauber and wiped the floor with Marcus Ericsson, it was no massive surprise because Charles was the next best thing. Zhou's expectations were way lower, maybe unfairly, but ultimately that does paint a more concerning picture of Valtteri at the moment. I mean, head-to-heads, right? It's 2-1 in qualifying to Zhou, 2-1 to Zhou in race as well. But I wanted to dig a bit deeper into those qualifying numbers specifically to try and look at what is the actual pace differential between these two. Both cars reached Q2 in both Bahrain and Saudi, and they both went out in Q1 in Australia. That gives us 5 sessions to compare. And that averages out at a fraction over a tenth. Now, for me, anything under, I'd say 0.2 is too small a gap to really make any meaningful assertions about driver pace relative, because there's factors, there's traffic, there's slightly changing conditions. If you're within 0.2, I'm saying you're close. But come on, for Zhou to at least be on pace with Valtteri at the moment, given Valtteri's experience, his pedigree, I feel like there should be no question he should be outperforming Zhou, and he just isn't. Look, this isn't to undermine Zhou Guanyu at all. I'm a massive fan of him. I think he's fantastic. I think he's really shown a lot of people, myself included, that he is the real deal. He's not just another pay driver. But it's like you look back at Valtteri's career at Mercedes. This is a man that, 1 in every 3 occasions, which is significant, would be able to out-qualify Lewis Hamilton. I mean, look at their qualifying head-to-heads over the 5 seasons together. And even on some race days, Lewis just could not touch him. Australia 2019. Prime example. Valtteri jumped him off the start and wheeled away and beat Lewis by over 20 seconds. Valtteri credits that as one of his greatest drives of all time, if not his greatest, because he was just in the zone. This is the thing, he could do it. He had it in his locker, but it came nowhere near consistently enough. Not if he wanted to fight for a championship with Lewis. I'm not being hard on Valtteri for that. I'm being complimentary. I think he did a fantastic job. Is he a victim of his own successes here? Maybe. I just feel like you're signing a driver with such plaudits, such experience. If you do lose a bit of that momentum, it makes you even more exposed. And look, I've seen people jumping on Valtteri a little bit for, this more relaxed version of Valtteri Bottas. Is it really getting the best out of him? This mullet is not making him go slower. That's silly. The whole stick to F1 bat that drivers, particularly Lewis, gets very unfairly hit with. It's nonsense. Drivers can be themselves, express themselves outside of the car and still deliver on track. That's without question. It is possible. Valtteri's got race wins. He seems really happy in himself now at this team. But I also think maybe, leaving Mercedes, that hyper-competitive environment, moving to a low midfield team, an environment that isn't going to be anywhere near as intense, maybe that is taking the edge off of his performances. I don't know. I do worry about his future at the team. Age isn't on his side. He'll be 34 at the end of this season. For real, even the most ardent Bottas fan out there watching, can you seriously say, given what we've seen, especially second half of last season and now start of this season, has Valtteri offered enough as a driver in helping develop the car and push the team forward? Has he done enough to consolidate and affirm his position at that team for when an eventual big German manufacturer picks up the keys? I don't think he has. Of course, much excitement exists around the impending Audi takeover of Alfa Romeo Racing. The team is dropping Alfa Romeo, remember. Next season, it's going to be probably just called Sauber. And once Audi officially fully come on board in 2026, Finn Rausing, who currently owns Sauber, will retain his 25% stake in that team, but the majority share will be owned by Audi, so they will have full control. The thing is, though, being a big manufacturer, having this big, huge global name does not guarantee anything in this sport. Take Toyota, who achieved nothing. A P4 Constructors finish in 2005 was the best that they managed. I mean, in 2008, they had a budget of $445.6 million. You might think, Tommo, that's a lot of money. That's a lot more than the budget cap at the minute. Well, Adjust that for inflation, because 2008 was a long time ago, financial crisis and all that nonsense. In today's money, that's $622.6 million. That's 4.5 times, more than 4.5 times more than the current budget cap. And guess what? They finished fifth. Fifth. $662.6 million for fifth. I will tell that story. We'll save that for another day. Maybe next week. Now we're in the cost cap era. You can't throw money at the problem, although Toyota proved that even if you do throw money at the problem, it doesn't guarantee anything. You have to be efficient, resourceful, smart, switched on to how F1 teams operate. Toyota, Honda, Porsche, Jaguar, these are all big budget, well-known household names that came to F1 to clean up and did nothing. Then you've got Andreas Seidel as CEO now at Sauber. On the face of it, seems like a great move. And this is the part of the sentence where I typically say no doubt. But I've got to be honest, I actually do have some doubts. Question for you. How much of McLaren's beginning of 2023 season struggles and not having a proper car ready till Baku, we still haven't really seen their 2023 car yet. This is what they're saying. How much responsibility for that do you put on Andreas Seidel? Because he didn't leave very long ago. He was team principal since 2019, right? I know Zach gets a lot of stick, but look, Zach's just a marketing man and he's bringing tons of brands. They've almost got 50 brands listed on their website now as sponsors. Surely it was Andreas' responsibility to make sure that team is going in the direction where it can have its car ready to go live at the start of the season. That's time management, unless he, planted a few little, I'm just going to lead McLaren down the wrong path and then goodbye, which I'm joking. I don't actually think that happened. You know what I'm saying? That's his responsibility, right? And look, I'm a big lover of Andreas Seidel. I'm a big lover of Otmar Safnauer. And when all this Oscar Piastri drama was kicking off, I was critical of Otmar because I don't think he managed that situation particularly well, particularly how he was not managing Fernando Alonso's ego particularly well, which is something you have to do when you've got a driver like that there who's, quality, but also he needs management, because if he loses his head, he's gone. All I'm saying is I'm somewhat left questioning Seidel's legacy because of what happened at McLaren towards the end of his stint anyway. Now, will him and Aluni Bravi coming in as not team principal, steady the ship? Because, again, things started going wrong at Alfa Romeo comfortably into last season. It's not like this is just a problem in the here and now. Maybe because of the impending Audi takeover, mid-season upgrades, they're kind of taking their foot off the gas and just going fully R&D centric, circa Haas 2021, maybe. But I mean, you look at Australia, that was the one and only team, especially when they had their DRS off, that was still struggling with porpoising. How are they like the only team who hasn't got their head around it, even with the 15 mil floor edge raises? Like, that's a problem. That's a shocker. Now, Audi did have conversations to do an equivalent deal that they've done with Sauber with another team, being McLaren. Obviously, I'm not aware of all the details, but Zach did admit these conversations did occur. However, it feels like with the whole renaming of the team, McLaren weren't prepared to do that, which is, fair enough. It's a legacy team. It also makes cars itself, right? That seemed to be the main stumbling block as far as we know anyway. Now, would a McLaren Audi Formula One team named like that, like McLaren Honda back in the day, would that work? Would that have satisfied Audi's desire to be in the sport enough? It's admirable they want their own team, but if they are just going to loiter towards the back, then is it worth it? Now look, McLaren of course are their own example of relative disappointment, I guess, especially given how strong they looked in, say, 2020. It felt like the McLaren recovery was almost complete, and here we are then being 6th quickest car at the minute. But with the new wind tunnel, the MTC, the legacy of that brand, Norris and Piastri, two super exciting young prospect drivers going forward. Part of me, even if the logic doesn't hold up, I've always just got this backdoor belief in McLaren. And at least in recent years, they've actually done it. They've got towards the front. They've challenged for race wins. They've won a race with Ricciardo. Now, where this would have made the most sense is, of course, with Seidel, because Seidel's loyal to VW. He was at Porsche before he came to F1. If Audi had just got in bed with McLaren, then Seidel could have stayed put and carried on doing what he was doing, assuming that was good, which I still believe it was. I think there's fair questions now. Instead, he's had to move to a whole different team, a whole different facility, get to know all these people. It's going to take time, same way it's going to take time for Vasseur to stamp his authority at Ferrari. It's going to be the same for Seidel now at Sauber. Whereas if they bought McLaren, Seidel's already in charge. I guess Audi could end up supplying McLaren with engines, because remember, Audi are going to build their own engines as well as own a team. So that's not off the table, because obviously the Seidel connection is still there to McLaren. And they seem to end things quite amicably anyway. Any business is just a bunch of different human beings working together under a collective. Alfa Romeo were able to cash in their early season performance last year to get P6 by the skin of their teeth ahead of Aston Martin, yet you look back and they haven't finished any higher than 6th since 2008. And that's when it was the BMW Sauber Formula 1 team, which, look, maybe that's what they need. Maybe they need a big German manufacturer to put loads of money, loads of resource into that team for them to flourish, because it's worked in the past. Alfa Romeo is just a sticker on the car. It's still a Ferrari engine. It will remain a Ferrari engine this season, next season, and the season after that. But given the modern historical evidence that is on show, I am concerned that that team is going to need big, significant changes in personnel if it's going to achieve the expectations that Audi is setting, which is going to be fighting right at the top, right? That car's got to not only improve and catch up to the top teams, but overcome the top teams. Red Bull look incredibly strong at the top, and Christian Horner's managed to keep that team so consistent. Aston Martin have momentum coming out of their ears. Ferrari always find a way to scrap towards the front eventually. Mercedes, they will be back with the Daimler support for sure. McLaren are signing off their wind tunnel and have a super promising driving pair. Alpine have something to build around the LL Blue driver lineup. Finally, come on Alpine, please make good cars. The expectation of this being an Audi Works team, of course, makes that team more appealing from not just a driver, from an engineer's standpoint as well. But again, there's no guarantees. That team needs to start showing the positive momentum like Aston Martin is showing right now. Because Aston have exposed a lot of teams, have shown that it is possible to jump from midfield right up to the top if you know what you're doing. We talk about young promising drivers not in great teams. If it's Lando, if it's Alex, maybe even Yuki, you know, are these drivers seeing enough to maybe take a gamble on Sauber that will become Audi? It's difficult when this team has consistently underperformed. Whatever you think, I think it's fair to say Andreas Seidel has got one hell of a job in turning that team around, because right now they are looking in the mud. So what do you think? Do you think settling for less ownership at McLaren would have been the smarter deal for Audi? Or do you believe that things will come good eventually and that team will be fighting under the Audi name by 2026? Big up Squarespace for sponsoring this video as per usual. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.